So the clocks have gone back and the temperature is dropping, and that can only mean that winter is officially here. And I'm actually quite happy about that because I really do love winter for photography. It's probably one of the best seasons of the year for getting out and taking images. And while it has all kinds of challenges, it also has all kinds of unique opportunities. Early in the next year, I'm going to be doing quite a lot of work in the snow. I'll be shooting in the Dolomites in January, and I'll be shooting a lot of videos while I'm there. And then in February and March, I'll be in the Lofoten for a couple of workshops. So what I want to do in this video is give 6 or 7 tips, both artistic and practical, for taking photographs in the snow. Now, the first tip is about composition. Snow gives you this unique opportunity for minimalism. Now, I really do love minimalism in composition. The fewer elements in an image, for me, the better that they are. And while quite often it's hard to create minimalistic landscape images, snow really does give you a chance to do that because you get these incredibly pristine white foregrounds. If you're lucky, you can get incredibly white skies or blizzard conditions. And this gives you an opportunity just to find really single or unique elements within a landscape to create a really compelling image just built around one particular element. Look for textures in the snow caused by wind or moving water in the tide lines, and shoot with a really wide angle lens and get right in close to fill this up with the foreground. Now, quite often when you're shooting landscapes and you're shooting wide angle, finding foreground can be quite tricky because a lot of foreground, things like mud and things like grass, it's just not very interesting, it's messy, it kind of makes the whole image look more complicated and puts too much detail in it. So trying to find an interesting foreground and arrange the elements is a big part of photographic composition. But when you're shooting in incredibly snowy landscapes, that kind of whitens everything out. Everything is different. You've got this whole clean foreground. It's like a blank palette that you can start with. And even better is when you've got these textures, as I said, created by the wind, where the wind's blowing through, and it gives you these kind of like little rivulets or little kind of ridges in the snow, which really give a fantastic foreground effect. Make the most of bad weather. Now, while bad weather when you're photographing in the snow can be particularly miserable and also create particular challenges when using your equipment, which I'll talk about a little bit later in the video, it also gives you some incredible opportunities to really use the mood of a landscape in a quite unique way. Because when a landscape is covered in snow, you really don't need colorful sunsets or beautiful light to make the most of the landscape. It's going to shine anyway, even with flat overcast light. There's always something that you can do. There's always a way of creating something dramatic in the landscape. There's a quietness and a mood and a stillness about a pristine snowy landscape, and you should look at ways in which you can capture that in an image. Again, like I talked about in the first tip, minimalism is one technique for that, but just using the cool blues in an overcast sky can really complement and bring out the best in the snow. Always exposed to the right. Now, if you're not familiar with that expression, what that actually means is that you should overexpose the image just a little bit to move all of the data away from the center of the histogram and to the right. Now, you need to be careful not to be clipping the images so none of the data is touching the right side of the histogram where the highlights are. But you do need to be overexposing just a little bit. Now, why is that? And that's because when you're shooting in the snow, if you're relying on the metering system in your camera, or if you're using auto exposure, what's going to happen is the camera is going to see this scene, which is mostly white in front of it, and it's going to try to move everything to the center of the histogram. Now, what that will mean is the snow is kind of darkened a little bit. It's going to look a little bit gray and a little bit muddy. So if you're shooting a scene which is mostly filled with white, you just need to overexpose by half a stop, maybe a full stop, to get that snow looking really bright and crisp and white again. There is nothing that can reduce battery life like cold. It really has a very negative effect on the efficiency of batteries. You'll find that when you're putting what you thought were fresh batteries into your camera, they've already kind of run out of their charge a little bit. So you need to change the way that you keep and carry your batteries in the field. Don't keep them in your bag because your bag gets cold, particularly if you're putting it on the snow. But even when you're carrying it on your back, it's not going to be all that warm. So the best thing that you can do when you go out into the snow is keep your batteries in a chest pocket so they get the warmth of your body, particularly if it's on the inside of an insulated down jacket. It's going to be warm in there and it'll keep your batteries nice and warm. So when you have to change batteries in the field, you're not putting a new battery in and finding that it's half run down, and it will give you much better battery life. Another quick tip is to be very careful about when you move your cameras and your lenses from the cold of the outside back into the inside of your accommodation or wherever it is that you're staying, because drastic changes in temperature like that, from cold to warm, can really create a lot of condensation inside the lenses of your cameras, which can shorten the life of them because it aids to creating fungus and things like that into the lenses. So keep your cameras away from heating and things like that. Obviously you probably don't want to be leaving them in the car all day, and you will be bringing them inside, but leave them in the hallway or in a room where it's not particularly warm. Don't put them next to radiators or anything like that, because it really does increase the possibility of getting condensation inside the lenses. Good gloves or a good glove system is really important, because there is nothing that is going to ruin your trip and make you more miserable than having cold hands. Shooting in the snow means obviously manipulating your camera every time you need to change the exposure or do something like that, or any adjustment that you need to make to the camera in the menu system. And if you have to take your gloves off and have bare hands every time you need to do that, with temperatures around -10 degrees, it's going to make you really unhappy really quickly. Pretty soon you're not going to be able to feel your fingers, your circulation is going to suffer, and you're not going to be in a very good mood. And while it's really easy to keep your hands warm in cold conditions, finding a system that works with a camera is a little bit more complicated. Now, one of the things that works best for me is to have a layering system. So I start with a pair of glove liners that have got tactile fingers and thumbs, so I can operate a touchscreen on a cell phone or something like that. And I never need to take these off. These are worn underneath a pair of gloves, and if I have to take those gloves off to do something with the phone or to make an adjustment with the camera, it means at least that my bare skin isn't going to be exposed to the really cold weather or the winds. Now, you can't wear just these because your fingers will still get cold with glove liners, but they're a great place to start, and everyone should have a pair in their bag. Now, on top of that, if you can find a pair of mittens or gloves like these where you can uncover and cover the fingers and the thumb, then that's excellent, because these you can keep on all the time. Anytime you need to make an adjustment, you can just flip the covers off your fingers, make the adjustment. Even better if you've got your glove liners on underneath so your fingers don't get cold, and it really works very well. Look particularly for ones where you can also uncover the thumb, because the thumb is something that we use a hell of a lot when we're manipulating the camera. Now, also, photography does require a lot of standing around waiting in the snow, sometimes when you don't need to be touching your camera and you can get very cold. And for these kind of conditions, I find it's really important to have a pair of insulated gloves with you. Now, these fall down really small, they take up no weight in your bag, but they will keep your hands warm when you're standing around in the dark before the sunrise, when it's windy and you can really feel the cold, and they will stop you from getting really, really miserable. Now, the last thing shouldn't really even need saying, but I can't make a video about photographing in the winter without saying to stay warm and make sure you wear appropriate clothing, because getting cold, not only is it going to ruin your trip, it can also make you sick, which is going to ruin your trip even more. So basically, when you think about this, when you're packing, always make sure you layer and think about what you're going to need. Plan what you're going to need to make sure that you're going to be able to stay warm. Now, that doesn't mean taking lots of clothes. It doesn't mean packing loads and loads and loads of stuff, but it does mean packing smart and thinking about how best to deal with these particularly cold temperatures. So I hope that's been useful, and I hope that's been interesting. And if you've got any questions on the video, just drop them in the box below and I'll make sure I get back to you. And if you'd like to join me on a workshop doing some photography in the snow, I'm going to be in Lofoten running a couple of workshops there in February and March next year. So check out my website for details, and I'd love to have you join me. And as usual, thanks for watching, and as ever, take care.